I didn't plan to say it. In fact, I didn't even know I had it in me. The evening had started like any other evening of its kind. A fancy party, too many drinks, small talk that felt more like a game of who can pretend the hardest. And there I was, trying my best to blend in, nursing my whiskey, hoping I didn't have to talk to anyone who might ask about my job. Because if there's one thing I've learned in the years of being married to Marissa, it's that conversations about my salary always end in disaster. I'd learned to let her shine, to let her be the center of attention, and for the most part, that was fine with me. After all, she was always the one with the big promotion, the accolades, the praise. She was the one with the sparkling career, and I was just me, the guy who kept the lights on and worked hard to make ends meet. And, as much as I hated admitting it, it was always enough for her to throw in my face. But that night, I didn't expect it to feel so different. I didn't expect it to hit so hard. We were at a gathering thrown by one of her friends, someone in her high-powered network, and the crowd was everything you'd expect from people who thought their wealth was their worth. They wore their success like a badge of honor, spoke in coded language about investments, deals, and property acquisitions that meant nothing to me. And Marissa, my wife, was in her element, of course. She was playing the role she had mastered so well over the years, the successful, witty, and beautiful wife. I had long since stopped trying to match her energy. I'd learned the hard way that when you're married to someone like her, you either learn to fade into the background or become a shell of yourself, constantly trying to catch up. She was beautiful, sure, confident, no doubt, and everyone loved her. But there was something that had started gnawing at me recently, a growing discomfort that I couldn't ignore any longer. The way she'd speak about her job, her new opportunities, and then toss in a casual comment about my small-time career. It wasn't just the words, it was the way she said them. Like I was a joke, a punchline that everyone pretended not to hear. I stood by the bar, sipping my drink, trying not to make eye contact with anyone. The noise of laughter, the clink of glasses, the hum of conversations filled the air. And then I saw her, Marissa, surrounded by her colleagues. She was holding court as usual, her laughter light and carefree. She looked at me, and for a split second, I thought maybe, just maybe, she would come over and join me. Maybe even acknowledge me, the person she called her husband. But no, she raised her glass and started talking again, her voice drifting through the room. I could see them all looking at me, her friends, her coworkers. They didn't know me, not really. To them, I was just Marissa's husband. And I had always been okay with that. Or so I thought. Then, out of nowhere, Marissa did it. She made her move, one of those offhand remarks that cut deeper than anything she had ever said before. "So, how's the job going, honey?" she said, loud enough for the group to hear. She paused, eyes twinkling with mischief. "I hope you're getting that promotion you always talk about. Or is that still on hold because of, well, you know." She didn't even finish her sentence, but the implication was crystal clear. The group chuckled, and she looked at me, waiting for my reaction. I froze. It wasn't the first time she'd belittled me like this. No, she had been doing it for years, subtle comments, the kind that sounded like jokes but were really just veiled criticisms. But this was different. It wasn't subtle. It was deliberate. It was loud, humiliating, and it felt like a slap in the face in front of a room full of strangers. I could see the glances, the slight nods of approval from her friends, the way they looked at me, unsure of how to react. To them, I was the joke. And for the first time, I felt my chest tighten, my hands grip the edge of my glass. I wanted to run. I wanted to disappear. But I didn't. Instead, something inside me snapped. I wasn't sure if it was the years of built-up resentment or the sheer audacity of her words, but I didn't care anymore. I raised my glass, a calm expression on my face, my voice steady, and I said it. Luckily, divorce is free, at least for me. The words rang out, cutting through the air like a knife. For a moment, no one spoke. The room went silent, and I could feel the heat of everyone's gaze. Marissa's face drained of color. The laughter died. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I had crossed a line. I knew that. But in that moment, I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of freedom. The words hung there, suspended in the air, hanging over her like an unspoken truth. Divorce. The thing we had both avoided, the thing that was always in the back of my mind but never discussed. And now it was out in the open. She didn't know how to respond. She gave a tight smile, trying to salvage the situation, but I could tell she was rattled. The control she had over me, over our relationship, was slipping away, and she knew it. I wasn't just the guy who stood in the corner anymore. I wasn't the man who took her barbs and played the part of the doting husband. No, tonight, I had said what I'd been holding back for years. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like I was the one in control. Marissa didn't speak to me the rest of the night. Neither did anyone else. The evening continued, but I felt a shift. Something was broken, irreparably, and it was in that moment that I realized. The walls I had built around myself, the ones that had kept me small and silent, were crumbling. And I wasn't going to be the quiet, invisible husband anymore. I had spoken my truth, and now I had to figure out what came next. The room was suffocating. Everyone stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, like they weren't sure how to react. I could see their eyes darting between me and Marissa, sensing the tension in the air. I could practically hear the wheels turning in their heads, trying to figure out if I was serious or just making some dark joke. But Marissa? She didn't move. Her face was pale, her lips parted but unable to form a response. I could feel the sweat forming on the back of my neck, but I held my ground. There was no going back now. I took another sip of my drink, trying to steady myself, but the sting of humiliation was still there, burning like a fire inside me. "Look, honey, I think you've had enough to drink," she finally said, her voice coming out in a strained laugh, the kind that's too high-pitched to be convincing. She tried to force the mood back to its usual light-hearted tone, but the damage had been done. I didn't care. I wasn't sure if it was because I was tired of being the invisible man in this relationship, or if it was the years of resentment finally boiling over, but I couldn't help but feel a strange satisfaction in that moment. Marissa, the one who always had the upper hand, the one who always made the decisions, was suddenly shaken. Her confidence had faltered, just for a second, and that was enough. The party continued, but I felt like I was no longer part of it. I stood by the bar, half listening to the conversations around me. People tried to engage me in small talk, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that everyone knew something had shifted, that something between Marissa and me had snapped. The night dragged on, but the weight of her insult lingered. How could she have done that to me? How could she mock my job, my career, in front of a room full of strangers? The sting of it, the ridicule, was sharp and painful, and I didn't know if I could ever forget it. And then, as the night was winding down, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned, half expecting to see Marissa, ready to apologize, maybe even make a weak attempt to smooth things over. But no, it was one of her colleagues, a guy I'd met only a few times. He was smiling awkwardly, clearly trying to make light of the tension that had settled between us. "Hey man, don't worry about what she said," he said with a nervous chuckle. "She's just being, herself. Marissa, right?" I forced a smile, but inside, something snapped again. This guy, a stranger, was trying to comfort me? He had no idea what it felt like to be belittled by the one person who should have been my biggest supporter. "I'm fine," I said flatly, not wanting to get into it with him. But as he walked away, I couldn't help but wonder, was I really fine? Or had I just spent the past few years swallowing my pride, my frustration, and my resentment? Had I let Marissa build this version of me, the man who would accept anything to keep the peace? I didn't have answers yet, but I knew one thing. Something was changing inside me. The next few days were tense, to say the least. Marissa didn't bring up what happened at the party. Of course, she didn't. She never did. She was good at pretending things didn't happen when they were inconvenient. But I couldn't let it go. Every time I looked at her, I remembered the way she'd humiliated me, how she'd casually thrown me under the bus for her own amusement. It wasn't just the comment. It was the pattern. The way she used my job, my lack of success, as a way to put herself on a pedestal. I could still feel the weight of those words hanging over me. Divorce is free, at least for me. Had I meant it? Or was it just the anger talking? The silence between us was unbearable. We didn't argue, but we didn't talk either. It was like we were two strangers living in the same house, pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. And for the first time in years, I didn't want to fix it. I didn't want to try to work things out. Because deep down, I knew something had broken, and maybe it was broken beyond repair. The days that followed were nothing short of unbearable. The silence between us felt suffocating, like a thick, oppressive fog that refused to lift. Marissa and I moved through our home as though we were living in parallel universes, each of us pretending the other didn't exist. She had retreated into her world of work, endless meetings, and emails, while I found myself spiraling deeper into my thoughts, unable to shake the sense that something fundamental had shifted. At first, I tried to ignore it. I went to work, kept my head down, and tried to focus on anything other than the uncomfortable tension in the air when I came home. I figured if I didn't bring it up, neither would she. But the more time passed, the more I realized just how wrong I was. It was impossible to ignore. Every time I saw her, my blood boiled. It wasn't just the way she had humiliated me at the party. It was the years of subtle insults, the dismissive comments, the unspoken expectation that I should just accept my place as the supporting act in her perfect little world. I had been trying to fit into a role that wasn't me, and it had taken all the willpower I had left to not shatter completely. One night, as I came home late from work, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, a glass of wine in hand. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you realize how much noise there had been in your life before. She didn't look up when I walked in, but I knew she was waiting for me to say something, anything, to break the tension. "Are we going to pretend that nothing happened?" I asked, my voice rougher than I intended. I could feel the words burning in my throat, like a fire I couldn't put out. Marissa didn't respond immediately. She took a slow sip of her wine, her eyes finally meeting mine. There was a flicker of something in her gaze, something I couldn't quite place. Regret? Anger? Or maybe it was just the realization that she had crossed a line she couldn't erase. "You know, I didn't expect you to say that at the party," she said, her tone softer than I anticipated. It caught me off guard. But I'm not going to apologize for what I said. You know how I am. I joke around. I felt a sharp sting in my chest at her words. She still didn't get it. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a casual comment. She had humiliated me in front of everyone, in front of people I didn't even know. And now, here she was, minimizing it as though it was no big deal, as though I was the one overreacting. I clenched my jaw, struggling to keep my composure. "You always do this, Marissa. You always make me the punchline, like it's funny, like I'm nothing. You don't get it, do you?" She put the glass down, her face hardening. "I didn't think it was that serious. I didn't realize you'd get so upset over something so small." Small? The word hit me like a slap. It wasn't small. It was everything. "You think it's small?" I almost whispered, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "You've been doing this for years, Marissa. Little digs here and there. Little comments about my job, my salary. It's not small. It's like you're trying to make me feel insignificant, like I don't matter. And I've let you do it." For a moment, she just stared at me, her expression unreadable. I thought maybe, just maybe, this time she'd get it. Maybe she'd see the pain in my eyes and realize how deep it went. But no. Instead, she sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I don't know what you want me to say, Jason. I've built my life the way I've built it. I'm successful. I'm proud of what I've accomplished. And well, you're you. I didn't think that was a problem. If you feel threatened by me, that's your issue, not mine." I felt like the ground had been pulled out from beneath me. For the first time, I saw her clearly, like the curtain had been pulled back and the truth was staring me in the face. She didn't see me. She never had. I wasn't her partner, her equal. I was just some guy who happened to be there, a bystander to her perfect, polished life. My heart sank. I couldn't believe I'd spent years trying to be something I wasn't, trying to fit into a mold she had crafted, trying to make her proud, trying to keep the peace. All this time, I had been bending myself to meet her expectations, and now I realized. I was nothing more than a shadow in her world. "I'm done," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "I can't keep doing this." Marissa looked at me, her eyes narrowing in confusion. "What do you mean, done?" "I mean, I can't keep pretending everything is fine," I said, my voice barely audible. "I can't keep pretending that I'm okay with the way you treat me. I'm tired, Marissa. Tired of being invisible. Tired of feeling like I'm nothing more than your accessory. I don't deserve this. And neither do you." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Marissa opened her mouth, but no words came out. I don't think she even knew how to respond. It was the first time in years that I had said exactly what I felt without worrying about her reaction. And the relief, the freedom that came with it, was intoxicating. I didn't know what the future held, or if this was the beginning of the end. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to keep living in the shadows anymore, and I wasn't going to apologize for it. For the first time, I was ready to face the consequences, whatever they were. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, though it was only a few seconds. Marissa didn't speak, but the way her eyes flickered with disbelief told me everything I needed to know. I had caught her off guard, shaken her from her perfect little world where everything revolved around her success and her carefully curated image. And she didn't know how to handle it. I didn't wait for her to answer. I couldn't. The weight of the moment was pressing down on me like a vice, and I needed to get out. I turned toward the door, grabbing my jacket off the chair. "You can't just walk away, Jason," she said, her voice sharp. It was the first time she'd raised it since the conversation started. I paused at the door, not looking back. "I'm not walking away, Marissa. I'm just not sticking around to be belittled anymore." With that, I left. I didn't look back as I walked out the door, leaving her standing in the middle of the kitchen, wine glass still in hand. I could hear her faintly calling after me, but I didn't stop. For the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of freedom. The air felt different as I stepped outside, like the weight of the world had lifted off my shoulders. It wasn't that I was happy, not exactly, but I wasn't suffocating anymore. I walked aimlessly for a while, my mind racing. What had just happened? How had things gotten to this point? I had spent so long convincing myself that I was okay with being her support, with being the background character in her life. But I wasn't okay. I was suffocating, dying a little inside every day, just trying to make her proud. And now, for the first time, I had said the words I'd been holding back for years. But the strange thing was, I didn't feel guilty. Not yet, anyway. I wasn't sure where that would take me, but I wasn't going to apologize for standing up for myself. By the time I found my way back home, the house felt colder. I didn't want to go back inside, but I knew I had to. The quiet, empty house was a stark contrast to the tension that had been building for so long. I opened the door and stepped inside. Marissa was still there, sitting in the same spot, but now she was staring at the floor, deep in thought. I could tell she wasn't expecting me to come back, but there was a tension in the air that I couldn't ignore. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she finally said, her voice softer than it had been earlier. But her words didn't feel real. They felt like a forced attempt at fixing something that was already broken beyond repair. I didn't respond right away. I needed to think, to process everything that had happened. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't just about a comment at a party. This was about a pattern that had been going on for years, and I wasn't willing to accept it anymore. "I know you didn't mean to," I said, my voice calm but firm. "But that's the problem, Marissa. You never mean to hurt me, but you do. And I'm done pretending it's okay." Her face flushed, and I saw a flicker of regret in her eyes. But it was too late. The damage had been done. The cracks in our relationship were too deep to fix with a few apologetic words. "I don't want to fight," she said, standing up and walking toward me. "I never wanted to hurt you. I just don't know what you want from me." And there it was. The question that had been hanging between us for years. What did I want from her? Was I asking too much? Was I expecting something she couldn't give me? The truth was, I didn't know anymore. But I did know one thing. I wasn't going to keep sacrificing myself for the sake of her ego, for her success. I couldn't do it. Not anymore. "I want respect," I said simply, the words finally making sense in my mind. "I want to feel like I matter in this relationship. Not just as your husband, but as a person. And I want you to see me for who I am, not just what I bring to the table." For a long moment, Marissa didn't say anything. Then, almost as if to herself, she muttered, "I don't know if I can do that, Jason." And in that moment, I realized she was right. She couldn't give me what I needed. She had never been able to. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything I had just said. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of clarity. The fog that had clouded my mind for so long was finally starting to lift. I wasn't sure what would happen next. I didn't know where our relationship was headed or if it was even worth saving. But I did know this. I wasn't going to be the man I had been any longer. I wasn't going to be the guy who let his wife tear him down and belittle him for the sake of her own ego. That night, I went to bed with a new resolve. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I knew I was no longer willing to settle for less than what I deserved. The days that followed were strange. I kept thinking about the conversation Marissa and I had, or rather, the silence that hung between us after I'd said those words. Every time I saw her, I felt this odd sense of distance. It wasn't just emotional, It was physical. She was there, but she wasn't really there. And neither was I. I woke up one morning to the sound of her in the kitchen, the coffee machine gurgling as it did every morning. It felt so normal, too normal. Everything about this morning seemed unchanged, like we were still playing the same game we had been playing for years, pretending that nothing was broken. But I knew better. Nothing was the same anymore. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen, watching her as she moved around, her back to me. She hadn't even noticed I was there. The sight of her, so perfectly put together, so effortlessly graceful, made my chest tighten. Was this the same woman who had humiliated me just a few nights ago? The same woman who thought I was nothing more than an accessory in her picture-perfect life? Are we going to talk about it? I asked, my voice quiet but firm. She turned around, her face unreadable. For a moment, she said nothing, just stared at me as if weighing her options. I don't think there's much to talk about, she finally said, almost as if she was trying to convince herself. You said what you had to say, and I didn't mean to make you feel that way. I couldn't help the bitterness that crept into my voice. You didn't mean to? That's the problem, Marissa. You never mean to hurt me, but you always do. She sighed, her eyes flashing with frustration. I'm not a mind reader, Jason. I don't know what you want from me sometimes. I thought I was just trying to be playful, but I guess I pushed too far. You always do that. I shot back, unable to hold back the hurt anymore. You make it my problem. Like it's my fault for not being okay with you tearing me down. You make me feel small, Marissa, like I don't even matter. Her face softened, just a little, but the defensive walls were still up. I didn't realize it was that bad. I thought you were just fine with everything. That you didn't mind being the one to keep the house running while I focused on my career. I thought that was enough. It's not enough, I replied, my voice steady but tinged with anger. I'm tired of just being enough. I want to feel like I matter. I want to feel like I'm not just a supporting character in your life. I want to be seen. For a moment, there was nothing but silence between us. Marissa looked like she was struggling to understand, to process what I was saying. And I knew, deep down, that she never had truly seen me. Not in the way that mattered. I'm not asking for perfection. I continued, my frustration building. I'm asking for respect. For real partnership. Not just this facade we've been living in. It's not enough for me anymore. The silence stretched longer this time. I watched her, waiting for some kind of response, but it was as if the words had drained her. She seemed defeated, unsure of how to fix something that felt so broken. I don't know if I can give you what you want, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I've ever been able to. That hit me harder than I expected. I had suspected it, but hearing her admit it out loud felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. Maybe I was the fool, holding on to something that was never meant to be. Maybe she had never truly seen me, never truly understood me, or worse, maybe she just didn't care enough to try. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure what to do. I stood there, in the kitchen that had been the backdrop to so many arguments, so many moments of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I realized then that I couldn't keep living like this. Not for her, not for anyone. I think we're done, I said quietly. It wasn't an outburst, but it felt like one, a slow, inevitable realization. Her eyes widened. You don't mean that. But I did. The words were final, and as they left my lips, I felt a strange sense of relief. A weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying seemed to lift, just a little. I do, I said. I can't keep pretending that this is enough. I've been pretending for too long. I need more than what you're willing to give. And with that, I walked away, the door closing behind me, not knowing what the future held, but knowing for the first time in years, I was finally doing what was best for me. The decision was made, but the aftermath was more complicated than I had anticipated. I didn't expect things to be easy, but I also didn't expect the cold emptiness that seemed to fill every corner of the house after I left that morning. It was the strangest feeling, like I was both relieved and trapped at the same time. I spent the next few days in a daze, unsure of what to do next. I went to work, buried myself in routine, but the truth was, I couldn't shake the heaviness that lingered. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, the way she'd looked at me when I said those words, like she didn't understand, like she didn't know what had been building up inside me for so long. And then there was the guilt. I knew it wasn't entirely my fault, but that didn't stop the creeping feeling that maybe I had taken it too far. Maybe I could have handled things differently. Maybe I could have communicated better. But deep down, I knew I couldn't change anything now. The moment had passed, and we were both left to deal with the consequences. When I got home that evening, the house was eerily quiet. Marissa wasn't there, and for a brief moment, I thought maybe she'd finally left. But then I noticed her shoes by the door, her purse on the counter. She was still here, but we were living in separate worlds. I tried to ignore it, to go about my evening like I usually did, but it wasn't the same. The silence between us was louder than any argument we'd ever had. The weight of the situation hung in the air, suffocating us both. After a few hours, I heard her footsteps in the hallway. She was coming down the stairs, and for a split second, I thought maybe we could have a normal conversation, maybe try to salvage something. But when she stepped into the living room, I saw it. The look in her eyes. She had changed, and so had I. "I don't know what you want from me, Jason," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "I don't know how to fix this." Her words stung, not because I didn't understand her pain, but because I realized that she wasn't trying to fix it. She wasn't willing to put in the effort. "I want honesty," I replied, my voice steady, though it felt like it was breaking inside. "I want you to stop pretending that everything's okay when it's not. I want you to see me, not just as your husband, but as a person with my own needs and desires. And I want you to stop treating me like I'm some kind of afterthought." She took a step back, as if the weight of my words had struck her. "I never meant to hurt you, Jason. You have to know that." "I know you didn't mean to," I said quietly. "But you did. Over and over again." She stood there, staring at me, her eyes softening slightly. But there was still a distance between us. It wasn't just physical, it was something deeper. Something we couldn't bridge with words anymore. "I don't think I can change, Jason," she whispered, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "I don't think I can give you what you want." And in that moment, I realized something that hurt more than anything else. She had given up. Not on me, but on us. On the idea of us as a team, as equals. I nodded, not because I had any answers, but because I knew what needed to be done. "Then maybe it's time for both of us to let go." She didn't say anything after that. She just turned and walked away, leaving me standing there in the silence that had once been so comfortable but now felt like a prison. The days blurred together after that conversation. The house felt empty in a way I couldn't describe, a quiet that was more suffocating than peaceful. Marissa and I moved like strangers under the same roof, neither of us really knowing how to navigate the space between us anymore. It wasn't anger that kept us apart. It was the realization that we had both drifted so far from each other, we couldn't find our way back. I woke up one morning to the sound of the shower running, her usual routine that had been so familiar to me for years. For a second, I almost wanted to crawl back into bed and pretend nothing had changed. But I couldn't. The weight of the reality we were facing was too heavy to ignore. I got out of bed, the silence of the house surrounding me, and made my way downstairs. The smell of coffee hit me almost immediately, but it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like something I was just visiting, something that no longer belonged to me. Marissa was sitting at the kitchen counter when I entered, her eyes focused on her phone, the sound of her fingers tapping against the screen echoing in the room. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to approach her, but then I spoke. "I think it's time we figure out the next steps," I said, my voice rough from the weight of it all. It was a simple statement, but it carried so much more. She didn't look up at first, but when she did, there was something different in her eyes. No longer the sharp, defensive look I had seen before, but something softer, almost resigned. "Next steps," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I think it's time we face the truth," I said, taking a deep breath. "We can't keep pretending. We've both been unhappy for a long time. We need to figure out how to move forward." For a moment, there was only silence. Then she set her phone down, the weight of her gaze heavy on me. "I don't know where to start," she admitted. "I never thought it would come to this." I didn't know what to say. The truth was, I didn't want it to end either, but staying in a relationship that was built on pretense and unspoken hurt wasn't an option anymore. I needed something real, something genuine. "I think we need to talk about everything," I said finally. "Not just the little things, but everything. The way we've been living. The way I've been living." She nodded, her expression softening, but the distance was still there, an unspoken barrier we could no longer ignore. "I've been selfish, Jason," she said quietly. I didn't realize how much I was taking from you, how much I was asking you to sacrifice." The words hung in the air, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were having an honest conversation. It wasn't easy. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And maybe that was all we needed at this point. "I've sacrificed too much," I said, "but I can't keep doing it. Not for anyone, not even for you." The words felt heavy as they left my mouth, but they also felt freeing. For the first time in years, I wasn't holding anything back. I wasn't pretending, and it felt good. "We need to figure out how to move forward, separately," I said. "I don't know what that looks like yet, but I can't stay in this limbo anymore." Her eyes welled up, but she didn't cry. She simply nodded, as if she already knew what was coming. I wasn't sure if she was relieved or just resigned to it, but I could see the understanding between us. We both knew this was the right thing to do, even if it was painful. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. But I couldn't respond with empty promises. I couldn't tell her it would be okay because it wasn't. The truth was, we were already lost. We had been for a long time. "I think we already have," I said softly. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a weight lift from my chest. The hardest part was done. We had finally said what needed to be said, and now we had to figure out how to rebuild our lives separately. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. I was finally taking control of my own life again. The weeks after that conversation weren't easy, but they were necessary. Marissa and I slowly began untangling the knots that had held us together for so long. We weren't exactly cordial, but we were functioning, and that was a start. It was the kind of uncomfortable silence you expect when two people know their relationship is over, but neither of them has figured out how to let go completely. As the days went by, I found myself reclaiming pieces of my life that had been buried under years of resentment and self-doubt. I reconnected with friends I hadn't spoken to in ages. I picked up old hobbies I had abandoned. And, most importantly, I started to find myself again. The man I had been before I let Marissa's world consume me was still there. I just needed to remember how to bring him back. The real shift came when I took a weekend trip to the coast by myself. I rented a small cabin by the sea, where the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks was all I needed to clear my head. I spent the time reflecting, not on what I had lost, but on what I was gaining. The freedom to make choices for me was something I had long forgotten. When I came back, I felt stronger. It wasn't about revenge or bitterness anymore. I wasn't interested in hurting Marissa. I wanted to live my life fully, without the weight of her expectations crushing me. And then, something unexpected happened. One day, as I was leaving work, I bumped into a woman I hadn't seen in years, Sophie, a former colleague of mine. We exchanged pleasantries, and before I knew it, we were talking about everything. How life had changed, what we were up to now, and how neither of us had realized how much time had passed since we last caught up. She was funny, smart, and somehow, we clicked. We went for coffee, and one coffee turned into a whole afternoon of conversation. The connection between us was undeniable. Over the next few weeks, we kept in touch. We started spending more time together, and I found myself looking forward to every moment with her. I felt like I was finally living again, not just existing. Sophie made me feel heard, understood, and, for the first time in a long time, appreciated. Meanwhile, Marissa seemed to be spiraling. She started showing up at our old places, asking questions, even texting me late at night, asking if we could talk again. She was confused, unsure of how to handle the fact that I was no longer the person who would bend to her whims. But I wasn't going to fall back into that trap. I had moved on, and it felt liberating. Eventually, I found out that Marissa had begun seeing someone new, a guy from one of her work events. At first, I wasn't bothered. I had no right to be. But as time passed, I learned a little more about him. And what I learned made me smile in a way I hadn't in years. He was everything she had always wanted: successful, ambitious, wealthy. But there was one thing I knew that he didn't. He was exactly the same as she had always seen me, a stepping stone in her pursuit of the perfect image. He was the shiny object she could use to polish her already perfect life. And just like me, he wouldn't be enough. I watched her pour herself into this new relationship, just as she had done with me. The signs were clear. She was playing the same game, trying to make herself feel validated through someone else's success. But this time, I wasn't there to prop her up. I was free. A few months later, the inevitable happened. She called me one last time, the voice on the other end shaky, broken. "I need to talk to you," she said. "I don't think I can do this anymore." I knew exactly what she meant. Her perfect image had cracked. Her shiny new life was starting to lose its luster. She had built a life on superficiality, on the idea that everything around her could be controlled, but she had underestimated one thing: the consequences of treating people like stepping stones. I felt no anger, no bitterness, just relief. "I think we're both better off," I said calmly, the words feeling more true than anything I had ever said to her. "You've always wanted perfection, Marissa, but maybe it's time you realize that it's not real. And maybe that's the hardest lesson to learn." The call ended, and I felt no desire to revisit what we had. I didn't need closure from her anymore. I had my own life, my own future to build, and I was finally in control of it. As for Marissa, well, the karma had already started to catch up with her. The new relationship she had so carefully crafted began to unravel, just as all of her relationships had before. She realized too late that you can only pretend for so long before the truth comes crashing in. And as for me, I was no longer the man who had quietly accepted disrespect. I was free. Free to build a life on my own terms. Free to find love again with someone who valued me. Someone who saw me for who I truly was. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about being right. It was about reclaiming my life. And that, in the end, was the sweetest form of justice.